Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the morning devotional. My name's Mike. I'll be looking after things this morning. Today we have a very familiar passage, widely read and widely spoken on. So let's have a look at it. And it is this one. Faith in action. Hebrews 11, verse 1 onwards. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance in what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah was warned about things not yet unseen. In holy fear, he built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and countless as the sands on the seashore. So there we have it. Very familiar passage. The challenge with an obscure Bible passage is what to say. The challenge with a familiar Bible passage is what to say that hasn't already been said. Or maybe it is good to recap familiar lines now and then. This morning, I will be a mixture of both. So I'm going to give some testimony thrown in for hopefully good measure. First of all, a statement of fact. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And every faith story also follows that pattern. Firstly, the beginning, and for this I'm going to concentrate on Abraham. When God clearly speaks, as was the case with Abraham, who God told to leave his land and go on a journey into the unknown as far as Abraham was concerned, and about which he would initially not know the outcome. Well, back in 1979, which is before all of you were born, apart from Ken, I was living in my own flat in Bletchley, where I grew up, and was working for a firm called Volkswagen GB, who you may have heard of. The job, of course, came with a company car in the days before tax on company cars was changed, and my parents were very happy about this. And then into this ideal situation came God's call for me to join Tier Fund in London. This, on the face of it, did seem an impossible proposition, with virtually zero pay and nowhere to live. But so it was a journey, if you like, which I didn't quite know how it was going to turn out. But God provided. A family in Teddington had just moved to a larger house, and God placed on their hearts the desire to serve, and they offered me a room. So the scene was set. However, I faced great resistance from my parents who, in their eyes, saw me throwing my life away. I did, after all, have a very nice place to live already, had I stayed put, and of course I had the Volkswagen Golf. Now the middle bit, and possibly the hardest part of the faith journey. Abraham is on his journey to nowhere in particular, as he sees it, and must have wondered if he was doing the right thing. And there is often these dilemmas in the middle of a journey like this. Should I turn back? Should I have been happier where I was? You know all the Israelite dilemmas when they were heading to the promised land. It would have been better if we'd stayed in Egypt, they said. So these middle parts of the faith journey are very challenging. And it's possibly the worst part of the journey because you can't see the results, but you can see what you've left behind. And where the end is not in sight, but just the pain and discomfort and the doubts about the initial calls rise up. When things don't always go to plan, where clinging on to God's original instruction to go forth becomes the only reassurance, and even that may be doubted. Maybe we doubt that we heard God correctly. Anyway, I moved to Teddington at the beginning of 1980 and joined my new family. They were a couple called Graham and Ruth, and they had 3 children who are all grown up now. A loving Christian family who gave me my first insight into how a Christian family operates. Because I was not in a Christian family. They are now in their 70s and still living in the same house in Teddington, and I'm still in touch with them and see them from time to time. They're good friends of mine, and they gave a lot to me. However, that first night in their house was a bleak affair. I was in a cold upstairs room in a strange place. It was then that the doubts really manifested themselves, especially as relations with my family had become strained due to my decision. They had never heard of Tear Fund and assumed I'd thrown my life away to join a religious sect. However, God does honour those who step out, and shortly afterwards, Tear Fund's notable supporter, Cliff Richard, I never thought he'd come to my rescue, embarked on a gospel concert tour, which just happened this time to be in my parents' hometown. Now, in the early 1980s, Cliff was a big star, and he'd enjoyed a renaissance in his career. He just had a #1 hit the previous year with It's So Funny or whatever it's called. The timing couldn't have been better, and my parents were given complimentary tickets to the concert. And suddenly Tear Fund was all over the local papers, because we had local papers in those days. They said many years later that I had made the right decision after all to join Tear Fund. So on the way, God provides pointers and encouragements. And Elaine, in her excellent talk yesterday, Where Were You If You Missed That?, gave these very important pointers for dealing with the middle part. These being firstly to focus on Jesus, and secondly to take one step at a time. And then we reach the end of the faith journey. The best part of the journey is when you can look back and see how things did indeed work out, just as they did for the eminent people described in today's passage. They may have doubted, but none of them wavered from the way God had chosen for them, and eventually they claimed their reward. Abraham did reach his goal and destiny. He did become the father of a nation. It could have been so different had he stayed where he was and he'd not embarked on that journey. Looking back on my Tear Fund experience, it changed my life forever. I met Pam there and we were married. Everything since has been impacted on that original decision to step into the unknown. So may I encourage you, when called by God, to make a step of faith, to walk out into the unknown, to embrace rather than to shy away. To shy away might just lead you on a wasted journey, with life going on pause. Remember Jonah and the whale. Are you going to cross the road and take the risk, or stay on the curb and play safe? Let me remind you once again of that 1939 message given by King George VI, which I've shared before. Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. that shall be to you better than light and safer than the known way. Right, I'm going to try something very experimental here now, so please bear with me. So, points to consider: faith in action. Number 1, faith is about action and not idleness. Number 2, faith is doing what doesn't necessarily seem to be sensible. Number 3, faith is about unswerving obedience to God and sticking with it. Number 4, faith is about seizing the opportunity and not playing safe. And number 5, faith is about reaching a destiny and going for it. And number 6, faith is about remembering those achievements in the past as a way of building confidence. So here is Elaine, and she shared this yesterday. We require character, patience, and endurance. And finally, this from Nelson Mandela, a man whose faith was tested to the very limits over many long years. Well, sorry, this one first. This is how Elaine finished her talk yesterday. The view from the top will be amazing. A faith journey ended and endured will lead to a great reward. And finally, as Nelson Mandela once said, it always seems impossible until it's done. And that's where I'm going to leave it. So thank you again for listening.